For generations, our tribe has called the Inland Empire region our home. We take pride in supporting our neighbors and the world around us. As one of the largest employers in the area, committed to the growth and prosperity of our community, we work to support many important local causes. Our tribe will always be here for this community, honoring our history, celebrating our culture, building a brighter future for us all.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines for Tuesday, October 6th. The Environmental Protection Agency is giving Oklahoma regulatory control over environmental issues on nearly all tribal lands there. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, who is Cherokee, made the request to the EPA 13 days after the McGirt Supreme Court ruling. Tiwa Chang, a reporter from TYT Investigates, broke the story and spoke about how this EPA ruling affects Oklahoma tribes.
I think the message here is that as soon as the Supreme Court came out with the McGirt versus Oklahoma decision, I knew the powers that are would not allow that to stand. And they're going to do whatever they can to crush that decision, and basically at the expense of Native Americans.
The governor's oversight request strips 38 tribes in Oklahoma of their sovereignty over environmental issues. It also establishes a pathway to potential environmental abuses on tribal lands. This includes dumping hazardous chemical byproducts of petroleum procurement and refining with no legal recourse by tribes. In 2019, Oklahoma had the fourth largest petroleum industry in the country. A federal judge is extending the voter registration deadline in Arizona to October 23rd. This will impact the 22 tribal nations in the state. Arizona is a swing state in this election, and there's also a heated race for a U.S. Senate seat. U.S. District Judge Stephen Logan extended the deadline late yesterday after Mi Familia Vota and Arizona Coalition for Change challenged the October 5th deadline. The judge cited the pandemic's impact on voter registration efforts, and he said while the state made it easier to register online, many people lack internet access. The Republican National Committee has filed an appeal. And in Alaska, a state court judge rules on witness requirements for absentee ballots. The judge said that during a pandemic, the requirement places a heavy burden on the right to vote. Natalie Landreth, an attorney for the plaintiffs, called the ruling common sense. The case was brought by the Arctic Village Council, the League of Women Voters in Alaska, and two individuals who have cited health concerns amid COVID-19 pandemic. The judge is giving the parties until tonight to decide how to get the word out to voters, and then will issue an order to eliminate the requirements for the November 3rd election. And tomorrow night, the vice presidential candidates will debate in Salt Lake City. And here's some history you may not know when it comes to Native Americans and the vice presidency. In 1928, Charles Curtis was elected vice president. He was Kaw Indian. Curtis served with President Herbert Hoover for 4 years. It would be several decades later before another Native American would run for that office. In 1980, LaDonna Harris, a Comanche citizen, was the vice presidential candidate for the Citizens Party. And in 1996, Winona LaDuke ran for the office on the Green Party ticket. She's Ojibwe and made a second bid for that office in 2000. Pew Research has called the VP debates the undercard to the presidential debates, which may be true in any other election year, but not during a pandemic and not when both presidential candidates are elders. Kamala Harris will face Mike Pence tomorrow night. Have you checked to see how your tribe is doing when it comes to filling out the 2020 census? On the website 2020census.gov, you can search for a map that shows the response rate for Indian country. A look at the map shows Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico has a response rate of 31.1%, while Standing Rock in North Dakota has nearly a 40% response rate. In Washington, the Yakima tribe shows a response rate of 54.7%, and in Arizona, the Tohono O'odham Nation has a 19% response rate. In Florida, the Seminole Tribe is reporting a 10.1% response rate at Brighton, and at Big Cypress, there's only a 2.7 response rate. Tribal leaders are urging citizens to complete the census to get an accurate count of Indian country. If you received a census form, you can fill it out and mail it back. You can also go to 2020census.gov to fill out your forms online, or you can call 844-330-2020 and talk to an agent who will help you fill out the forms. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today for Tuesday, October 6th. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, tribal casinos are reopening smoke-free, how the pandemic is changing the industry. As the coronavirus pandemic spread across the country in March, by April it had shut down nearly every tribal casino. Then, as tribal leaders cautiously reopened the casinos, they did so smoke-free. We spoke to Clinton Isham in May about this change. He's a citizen of the Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, and he leads a national campaign for commercial tobacco smoke-free tribal governments and casinos. He is the tribal relations consultant for the American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation. He joins us to give us an update on the smoke-free movement and how tribal casinos are being impacted. Welcome back, Clinton.
Thank you for having me back. There is nothing but great news on the tribal casino front and the gaming front in general, as far as starting to reopen. Like, as you said, in the beginning of this year, many of the tribal casinos were closed. And I think a lot of casinos were trying to figure out the safest way to open as possible. And there was already a very, a trend coming in around healthier living and clean indoor spaces and things like that, initiated by the smoke-free movement. And I think a lot of casinos were already on the verge of creating these policies, but in the wake of COVID-19, it became a reality as far as tribal leaders demanding for it, and these gaming managers demanding that when their casinos reopen, that they reopen smoke-free. And something that American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation has done was we try to help create media as far as best practices and how to go forward with that, and really just trying to mobilize advocates and tribal citizens and other gaming leaders that people want this. People want clean indoor spaces, especially now, and that if casinos were to reopen, they should reopen, the cleanest possible, and in that way they could have more people coming in, spending more money, spending more time at these casinos, and hopefully they'll be able to have some sort of rebound as far as the loss that they occurred when they were closed.
And according to the National Indian Gaming Commission, there are 460 tribally owned casinos. And when we had you on in May, at that point, there were some casinos that were starting to reopen. I think you mentioned primarily in Washington State. There were about 8 that were reopening smoke-free. Give us an idea of how that number has increased since then.
Upon all of these things happening, as of today, over 135 tribal gaming casinos are 100% smoke-free. Some of these are temporary. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that because of this tribal initiative of casinos going smoke-free, a lot of non-tribal gaming casinos are now following this tribal movement.
What is the changing face of the smoker? You've done some research on that through the years. How is smoking on the decline?
Since casinos first, tribal casinos initially opened in the 80s and the 90s, the smoking rate among adults and other age groups was very high, somewhere. I don't have like the numbers in front of me right now, but they're very high. And through the tobacco control and prevention movement and all the great work a bunch of great groups have done throughout the years, creating policies within states and municipalities and different governments, the tobacco smoking rate has went down dramatically. I think right now the adult smoking rate is around 8%. But what's interesting is that all different age groups right now for smokers it has a drastic decrease compared to what it was, even 5 or 10 years ago. So the smoking rate keeps going down, and so it really just makes sense that these policies are implemented everywhere, because this is the preference that people want. This is the preference that millennials want. This is the preference that baby boomers want, and throughout all age groups.
So also joining us today is Bronson Frick, and he is the Director of Advocacy for the American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation. Welcome, Bronson.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Now, you looked at the nationwide impact on the coronavirus, how the coronavirus is having on non-tribal casinos and enterprises, as well as tribal casinos around the world. Give us a picture of what that is looking like globally.
There was already significant momentum on the trend for smoke-free casinos before the pandemic. However, with renewed interest in respiratory health and the impact that can have on business and perceptions of safety going into a building, the trend has certainly continued at a really an unprecedented rate. There were already numerous countries that required smoke-free indoor air in all of their casinos. And in the United States, there were already nearly 800 smoke-free casinos and gambling venues, most of those being the commercial state-regulated venues. During the pandemic, it was really the leadership of sovereign tribes taking the step to implement smoke-free policies as part of their reopening plans that has really driven a lot of this recent momentum. And in response to the early leadership of tribes on this issue, now we have seen commercial operators and states really following their lead.
All right, and what about the revenue? You know, a lot of talk was, mentioned before the pandemic hit. What about the revenue when it comes to the gambler who says they don't want to go there if they can't smoke? What have you seen in that area, Bronson?
Well, there's a lot of layers to this. So right now, regardless of smoking status, gaming revenue is obviously down. It's been a lot of disruption. Traditional players may have lost their jobs. There's less discretionary spending. So even casinos that do still have smoking, like those in Las Vegas, there's been massive decline in gaming revenue. The idea, and going back to a point you were raising with Clinton, today 90% of young adults are non-smokers. So that's like Gen Z and millennials. And with seniors, Americans age 65 and over, 92% are non-smokers. So this really provides an opportunity for casinos to reopen after deep cleaning, really maximizing that investment in creating a safe, welcoming environment for everyone. What we're finding is from various surveys is that even many smokers who are gaming enthusiasts also prefer a smoke-free indoor air environment. People don't necessarily want to breathe other people's smoke. And so stepping outside to a patio is a modification that is not that big of a change for players, but it does keep the indoor air fresh and welcoming for everyone.
And Clinton, what are you hearing about the workers at the casinos or even the performers who go there for concerts? Have they weighed in on this movement as well?
We've had some interviews with at least some performers through some media campaigns that we did, people that have either concerts or, play music at casino venues. And the preference from majority of people that host these events or come to these events would rather have it smoke-free, definitely. There's apart from the smoke-free casino movement through American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation, there's another huge movement that ANRF does is called Smoke-Free Music Cities. And that whole campaign just really focuses on the different musicians in different cities that may not have those types of protections at bars or different venues. And a majority of these through surveys too, and through, I guess, the actual performers, that the majority of these people prefer these event spaces, arena spaces to be smoke-free as well.
On your website, you have a list of casinos that have gone smoke-free. Let's take a look at that list. And Bronson, tell me a little bit about some of the names of the casinos that we're seeing on there and when they went smoke-free.
Sure. As far as the sovereign tribal gaming facilities, there are many major casinos that have implemented smoke-free indoor air. These include Mohegan Sun, Pechanga Casino in Southern California. Many of the major tribal gaming facilities across the Midwest are now smoke-free, including the Four Winds and so many others. And if you look at a state-by-state level, so like in Michigan, there's now around a dozen smoke-free tribal gaming facilities, which really led the way. All of the Michigan state-regulated casinos are also now smoke-free in Detroit as part of a state reopening guideline, but it was really the tribes that led the way. Overall, there are now around 1,000 smoke-free casinos and gaming venues in the U.S. So it's really becoming the industry standard. In addition, there are recent announcements. MGM Resorts reopened a casino called Park MGM, which is on the Las Vegas Strip. That is reopened with a smoke-free policy. And it really shows the changing expectations on this issue, really across gaming markets.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And before we go, Clinton, one quick note on the future. Is this a trend, or is this actually going to stick and stay around, tribal casinos being smoke-free?
Well, there's lots of studies that people prefer smoke-free casinos. There's lots of surveys that are coming out right now that people prefer. I think a lot of these tribal casinos and other casinos are going to find that their customers prefer this, that their customers will stay longer. They'll play more money in smoke-free venues, and they'll want, the casinos themselves will want these policies to stick and to remain permanent and to stay long-term at their casinos.
Well, we want to thank both of you for joining us today to talk about how this pandemic is causing casinos, both tribal and non-tribal, to go smoke-free. Bronson Frick, the Director of Advocacy for the American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Clinton Isham, the Tribal Relations Consultant for the Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation. Thanks again for joining us, Clinton.
Thanks.
And when we come back, do natives pay taxes? When the New York Times reported on Donald Trump's tax returns, we learned he paid $750 in taxes for 2 years in a row, and none for most of the last 12 years. It prompted the question that many Native Americans still face: do natives pay taxes? Dalton Walker is our national correspondent based in Phoenix, and he tackled this question head on. He joins us now to tell us more. Welcome, Dalton.
Bonjour, Patty. Good for having me.
Well, Dalton, you know, most likely you've grown up with this. I certainly have. It's been a myth for so long that, this question about whether or not Native Americans pay taxes. What did you find?
Yeah, as you mentioned, before Trump said he had the coronavirus, was a report by the Times that he paid little to federal income tax. Federal income taxes being the key phrase here. We periodically want to remind our readers and potential readers who happen to find IndianCountryToday.com that Native people do pay taxes just like all you U.S. citizens. It's an unfortunate that continues after these years, to the point that credible Native websites like the Native Rights Fund and the Interior Department have it answered as part of its frequently asked questions. I just found it interesting that they felt it was needed to be included in 2020.
Right, this myth that's stuck around for so long, that this idea that natives have free money from the government, we don't pay taxes, and yet there's a lot of proof that we do pay taxes. And the Native American Rights Fund, as you mentioned on their website, talked about this in particular. And what kind of feedback have you received from your story from people who are saying, wow, this is new information to me? What have you heard?
Well, sometimes we publish articles just for the fact that this is what's going on. So some comments, some feedback I've been getting was that's right, as more like reinforcing like, this is the rule, this is what's happening, these stereotypes exist for whatever reason, but yes, this is right. And there were some that were learning, which is good. That's always the key process. If there can be a teachable moment, or someone can take something from articles too.
And what about state taxes? What did you report on with that?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the federal taxes was the news peg because that's what was related to Trump. State taxes and other type of taxes all kind of have a different layers when it comes to Native people, tribal governments, and Indian country as a whole. Basically, when each state, which reservations are in each state, tribes are their own sovereign nation, their own government code, so they get to decide with what needs to be taxed and what type of taxes can be implemented and what type of taxes will employees have to pay regarding the state process. So it's really up to them.
Wow, so a lot to unpack there. And again, as you pointed out, the effort to educate and to enlighten people is a big mission here at Indian Country Today. What else are you working on, Dalton?
I'm working on a few things. Of course, election stuff related. We are 28 days out. So please register if you haven't. Make your voice be heard. A story we're following that continues to develop is related to Arizona and election day mail-in balloting. 6 citizens up in Navajo Nation have challenged the state in allowing their mail-in ballots to be counted after election day, which Arizona is one of the states that don't allow. A judge struck it down and said no, but it has been appealed, and that appeal should be heard here in the coming days. So that's not great news for the plaintiffs, but at the same time, that's potential news that they could make things change. And this comes as a federal judge pushed back Arizona's voter registration deadline from October 5th to October 23rd. But when you think about it, it took a judge's decision for that to happen.
And the plaintiffs were saying in that case that during the pandemic, it was really hard to get people get registered to vote. And why is Arizona so important when it comes to the Native vote?
Arizona has a nice Native population. It has a lot of urban Natives as well. And the importance of the native vote is like any state is there, but Arizona is a state that has a serious impact when it comes to native vote, with Arizona being what you would consider a purple state when it comes to the two major parties. So natives can make an impact at the federal level, and they can also make a serious impact at the local level just by simply voting.
All right. Well, Dalton Walker, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll continue to follow your stories and also follow the campaign trail. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tawahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
Indian Country Today is recorded at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Indian Country Today.